The signal came without warning. No diplomatic vessel, no advance notice, no polite request to enter the solar system. 40 warships of the Drathan Empire simply appeared at the edge of human space, weapons hot, engines burning, and broadcasting on every frequency humanity had ever used. The message was short. Grand Consul Voreth's face filled every screen on every ship, station, and colony that picked up the signal. He was tall by Drathan standards, with gray-black skin and 4 narrow eyes that never quite blinked at the same time. He wore the kind of uniform that had medals on it not because he had earned them, but because no one was allowed to tell him otherwise. "People of Earth," he said in perfect translated standard, "the Drathan Empire requires your assistance in the ongoing conflict against the Velhari Accord. You will supply weapons, soldiers, and logistical support beginning within 72 hours. In return, you will be granted protected status under Imperial designation. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification." The broadcast ended. For about 4 seconds, the United Earth Chamber was completely silent. Then everybody started talking at once. Director Asha Romero did not talk. She sat at the head of the long table and watched her colleagues shout over each other, and she let them go for exactly 90 seconds before she pressed the small button on the table in front of her that cut the audio feed in the room. Everyone stopped and looked at her. "We have received a demand," she said. "Not a request, a demand. From a government that signed the Galactic Neutrality Charter in 2301, in which they agreed in writing in front of 46 other civilizations that Earth's non-participation status was permanent and legally binding." She folded her hands. "So what we have here is not a military problem. It is a legal violation, and we will treat it as one." One of the younger advisors leaned forward. "Director, they have 40 warships." "I am aware of how many ships they have," Romero said. "I can count." She stood up and moved to the large display at the front of the room. The Drathan fleet showed as 40 red marks at the edge of the system, sitting just outside the boundary line that Earth had registered with the Galactic Council as sovereign space. "They are outside our boundary," she said. "They are not attacking, they are threatening. There is a difference, and that difference matters because it means we still have time to do this correctly." She turned to face the room. "Draft a formal response. Cite the Charter, Article 9, subsections 3 through 7. Remind Consul Voreth that his own government's signature is on that document. Send it through official galactic legal channels with copies to every co-signatory." "And if he ignores it?" someone asked. Romero was quiet for a moment. "Then we move to the next step," she said. Nobody asked what the next step was. Something in her voice suggested that asking would be a waste of time. 3 hours later, Earth's formal response reached the Drathan fleet. It was 11 pages long, written in galactic legal standard, and it was so thoroughly sourced and documented that 3 separate alien governments who received copies sent quiet notes of appreciation to Earth's legal office simply for the quality of the work. Voreth read the first paragraph and threw the document at his communications officer. "Send them this," he said, and dictated 4 sentences that amounted to, "We do not care about your documents. You have 69 hours remaining. Do not waste them." Back on Earth, Asha Romero received that response, read it once and set it on her desk. Then she picked up a different communicator, an older one, encrypted on a frequency that did not appear in any public directory. "Admiral Drav," she said when the line connected, "I need you to come in." There was a pause on the other end, the sound of wind maybe, somewhere quiet and far from a city. "How bad?" Admiral Drav asked. His voice was the kind of voice that had spent 40 years giving orders and was not alarmed by very much. "Drathan's 40 ships, 72-hour ultimatum." Another pause. "I'll be there in 6 hours, he said. "I know," Romero said. "I already had your clearance reinstated." She ended the call and looked out the window at the sky. It was early morning in Geneva. The light was pale and clean, and the streets below were starting to fill with people going to work and school and markets. People who did not yet know that 40 warships were sitting at the edge of their solar system, and that the man who commanded them believed he had already won. Romero watched them for a moment. Then she went back to work. Far out in the dark, beyond the orbit of Neptune, a ship called HFY Sovereign sat with all its running lights off and its active sensors cold. It had been sitting that way for 11 hours. Captain Ren Akaffer stood in the dim light of the observation deck and watched the distant cluster of Drathan ships through a passive optical scope. He did not look worried. He looked like a man who had been waiting for something for a very long time and had just been told it was finally arriving. He called his tactical officer. "Sira," he said. Lieutenant Sira Nyland answered immediately. "Already running solutions, Captain. Been running them since they showed up." "Good," Ren said. He folded the scope and went back to the bridge. The Drathans had 68 hours and 57 minutes left on their ultimatum. Nobody on the Sovereign looked like they were in a hurry. The Velhari Accord had been watching since the moment the Drathan fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the human system. Ambassador Dean sat in a small room aboard the Accord's observation vessel and watched the feeds with the kind of careful attention he had given to humanity for most of his adult life. He was old, even by Velhari standards, with scales that had gone from deep blue to pale gray blue over the decades. He had spent 11 years trying to convince Earth to join the war on the Accord's side. He had been refused 11 times. He kept coming back. His aide, a younger Velhari named Pas, set a data pad on the table. The human response document, legal sent it up. Apparently it is very thorough. "It would be," Dean said. Pas hesitated. "Ambassador, do you think the humans will comply? Voreth's fleet is significant if they bombard." "They won't comply," Dean said simply. "You seem very certain." Dean set down his drink. "Pas, most of the galaxy has never understood humanity's neutrality. They look at it and see weakness. They see a species that chose not to fight, and they assume it is because humans cannot or because they are afraid." He shook his head. "Humans chose not to fight for the same reason a person who has burned their own house down once is very careful around fire afterward." Pas blinked. "I don't follow." "Humans nearly destroyed themselves," Dean said. "Not once. Several times. Their own history is full of it. Wars that killed tens of millions. Weapons they built and then spent generations being terrified of. They chose neutrality not from fear of other species. They chose it because they know exactly what they become when they stop holding back, and they don't want to become that again unless they have no other choice." Pas looked at the sensor feed. "And if Voreth forces that choice?" Dean picked up his drink again. "Then the Drathan Empire will learn what we in the Accord learned to be very grateful we never had to learn." On the Drathan flagship, Consul Voreth was in a good mood. He walked the command deck with his hands behind his back and felt the satisfaction of a man who believes he has already won before the fight begins. He had studied humanity. He had reviewed their declared fleet numbers, analyzed their defense budgets, built a complete picture of Earth's military from public records and intelligence reports. The picture was not impressive. 41 declared warships, small colony defense platforms, professional but limited ground forces. For a species in interstellar space for over a century, they had invested surprisingly little in military hardware. Or so the records said. Subcommander Oli stood at the edge of the command deck staring at his data pad, not because it was interesting, because something about it was bothering him. The numbers were modest. The fleet was small. The defenses were minimal, but there was a pattern in what was not there. No records of decommissioned ships, budget line items feeding into departments with nonspecific names, maintenance contracts for facilities not attached to any declared installation, things that should appear in the records that did not. Oli's walked to the console. "I want to raise a concern about the intelligence summary. There are gaps. Small ones but consistent." Voreth glanced at the pad. He read for about 5 seconds. "You're seeing ghosts. The humans are exactly what the records say they are. A species that chose comfort over strength. Focus on the logistics of the transition when they comply." Oles took the pad back. He said nothing else. He went to his station and added 3 more red markers to his private notes. Deep inside Earth's moon, in a facility that appeared on no public document, Admiral Drav sat across from Captain Ren Akafer, and a room full of people whose names were equally absent from any public record. The room was cold and lit for function rather than comfort. "Current status," Drav said. Ren spoke first. "Sovereign is dark, positioned for observation. Sierra has partial firing solutions already, full solutions within 12 hours. A woman named Holt, who ran Earth's classified shipyard program, pulled up a display. 47 vessels at tertiary sites, ready to move on your order. Full stealth. None of them are in any registry Vorath's people have access to." Drav nodded, and Calder's Rest. "Population moving to deep shelters for the past 8 hours, Holt said. "Standard protocol, no announcements." Drav looked at the table. "They'll hit Calder's Rest, most exposed, most symbolic, small enough Vorath thinks it won't break us, big enough that the image will." He looked at Holt. "Every person underground before that deadline expires." "Already underway," Holt said. Drav sat back in his chair. 66 hours, he said. "Let's be ready in 40. The room was quiet in the way rooms get quiet when people understand exactly what is coming and have decided, clearly and without panic, what to do about it. Outside the moon's hidden facility, the solar system looked the same as it always had. Planets in their orbits, ships running their declared routes, everything normal and ordinary and exactly as the Drathans expected it to be. That was the point. In the dark beyond Neptune, the Sovereign sat cold and still, watching a fleet that was watching back, and Sierra Nyland was at her station doing the only thing that actually mattered in the hours before a fight that had not started yet. She was paying attention. Calder's Rest was a farming world. That was the only way to describe it, really. Red soil that grew grain better than almost anywhere else in human space. Long flat fields that went to the horizon in every direction. Small towns with practical names, like Junction and Milford and South Reach. The kind of places where people knew each other, where the roads were unpaved because paving them had never seemed urgent, where the biggest annual event was the harvest and everybody came out for it. The population was 412,000 people. They had been underground for 19 hours by the time the Drathan ships arrived. Nobody had announced it officially. Word had moved through Calder's Rest the way word always moved in small communities, person to person and door to door. The message was simple. The shelters are open. Bring 3 days of supplies, go now, tell your neighbors. People did not panic. They moved quickly and quietly and helped each other carry things and made sure the elderly got there first. By the time the Drathan strike group dropped out of FTL in the planet's upper atmosphere, the streets of every town on Calder's Rest were empty. Subcommander Oles commanded the strike group from the bridge of a destroyer called the Drathan Certainty. He stood at the viewport and looked down at the planet and felt, for the first time in his career, that he did not want to carry out an order. He carried it out anyway. The siege cruisers fired first. Long, sustained energy beams that hit the surface and kept hitting. The grain fields burned. The town centers burned. The unpaved roads and the harvest equipment and the practical little buildings with their practical little names burned. The bombardment lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes, and Consul Vorath broadcast it live on every galactic channel he could reach because that was the point of it, not the burning itself, the watching. Oles did not watch. He stood at his sensor board and looked at his instruments and noted, with a growing unease that he could not explain yet, that there were no heat signatures on the surface consistent with living bodies, no emergency transmissions, no evacuation ships trying to break atmosphere, nothing. 412,000 people. not a single one visible on any sensor. He pulled up the deep scan results and stared at them. The shelters were old, built into the bedrock decades ago, back when Calder's Rest was first colonized, back when humans apparently considered deep underground bunkers standard infrastructure for a farming colony. The scans showed them faintly, far below the burning surface. Hundreds of them, organized, stocked, full of people who had gotten underground before the first shot was fired. Oles marked the scan result and added one line to his private log. They knew we were coming. In the United Earth Chamber, the broadcast from Calder's Rest played on every screen. Nobody spoke. Asha Romero watched the fields burn and the towns come apart, and she kept her hands folded on the table in front of her, and her face showed nothing at all. She had been sitting that way for the full 2 hours and 14 minutes of the bombardment. Around her, some people had looked away. Some had cried quietly. One advisor had left the room and not come back. Romero had not moved. When the bombardment ended and the screens showed only smoke and ruin, and a Drathan flag being broadcast over the wreckage, she reached forward and turned off the display. She looked at Admiral Drav, who was standing against the far wall with his arms crossed. "All personnel accounted for?" she asked. Drav nodded. 412,000 underground confirmed safe. Romero nodded once. Then she said it. "Admiral, the leash is off." Drav pushed off the wall and walked out of the room without another word. The door closed behind him. The room was very quiet. Several people who had not been sure what that phrase meant felt now that they understood. Romero turned to the room. "Draft a statement for the galactic community. Keep it short. State that the Drathan Empire has committed an act of war against the human colony of Calder's Rest in direct violation of the Galactic Neutrality Charter. State that Earth is now responding accordingly. No further detail." "How much detail do we give about the response?" someone asked. "None," Romero said. She stood up. "Consul Vorath has spent 72 hours believing he was negotiating with us," she said. "He was not. He was giving us time. We used it." She picked up her notes from the table. "He will learn the difference shortly." She left the room. On the Drathan flagship, Vorath watched the broadcast of Calder's Rest with deep satisfaction. His communications team was already receiving signals from across the galaxy, other governments and civilizations registering shock, uncertainty, condemnation. Good. Let them watch. Let them understand that the Empire was serious, that neutrality had a price when the Empire needed something. He expected within the next few hours to receive a communication from Earth, distressed, asking for terms, asking how to comply. What he received instead was Earth's public statement, 12 sentences, formal language, no emotion. He read it and felt the first small, cold note of something that was not quite worry, but was adjacent to it. His communications officer looked up. "Consul, we're getting an anomalous reading from the outer system." Vorath walked to the sensor board. The reading made no sense. Multiple contacts appearing from nowhere, no FTL signature, no drive emissions. Just there suddenly, where nothing had been. "Calibration error," he said. "We've recalibrated 3 times," the officer said quietly. On his console, Oles pulled up the same reading and felt the blood drain from his face. 112 contacts. And they were already inside minimum response range. The EFS Sovereign came out of stealth 11 kilometers from the Drathan flagship. 11 kilometers is nothing in space. At that range, the 2 ships could see each other's hull markings without magnification. At that range, the energy signature of the Sovereign's weapons powering up registered on Drathan censors the way a scream registers in a quiet room. There was a moment of absolute stillness on both bridges. Then Captain Ren Akafer opened a channel. "This is Captain Ren Akafer of the Earth Federation ship Sovereign. Your government has committed an act of war against a human colony in direct violation of the Galactic Neutrality Charter. You are directed to stand down all weapons, hold position, and await further instruction. You have 30 seconds to comply. On the Drathan flagship, the bridge erupted. Voreth screamed at his weapons officer to fire. The officer's hands moved to the controls and stopped, because at 11 kilometers the Sovereign's targeting systems were already locked on every critical point of the flagship's hull, and everyone on that bridge understood that firing first at that range was not a military decision. It was suicide. Oles did not wait for the 30 seconds. He pulled up the ship-wide channel and did something he had never done in his career. He countermanded a direct order from the console. All Drathan vessels, this is Subcommander Oles. All stop. Do not fire, all stop. Voreth spun on him. You do not have the authority. I have the authority to prevent the destruction of this fleet, Oles said. Sir, look at your sensors. 112 contacts, surrounding the Drathan fleet from every vector without a single gap in coverage. Every Earth ship already locked, already positioned, already waiting. 40 Drathan warships against 112, in a formation that had clearly been planned well in advance. The 30 seconds expired. Sira Nyland said 3 words into her headset. Solutions confirmed. Ready. Execute, said Wren. What happened in the next 42 seconds had been rehearsed 6 times in simulation. Sira did not fire at the large targets. She fired at the connective tissue of the Drathan fleet, the dedicated communications ships, the fleet coordination vessels, the 2 command relays passing orders between Voreth and his captains. In 42 seconds, the Drathan fleet went from a coordinated force to 40 individual ships with no idea what to shoot at or who was telling them to. Then Earth's hidden fleet moved. The Drathan captains, each alone on their bridge with no orders and no coordination, faced something their training had not prepared them for. The Earth ships that came for them did not fight in the dramatic way that military history tends to celebrate. Each Earth vessel picked a target and worked it with methodical, unhurried precision. No wasted shots, no attack runs for show. Careful, systematic pressure, identifying weaknesses and working them, the way you approach a problem you have studied in advance and already know the answer to. Which was exactly what this was. For 19 hours aboard the Sovereign, Sira had done nothing but study the Drathan fleet, every patrol route, every shield rotation cycle, every power distribution pattern. She had fed that data to the other Earth ships in real time. When the fight began, Earth's captains were not discovering their opponents. They were confirming what they already knew. It lasted 31 minutes. Some Drathan ships surrendered early, their captains making the same calculation Oles had made. A few tried to run and found that Earth ships at the outer edge had been positioned specifically for that. One ship tried to ram. It was disabled before it completed the turn. Voreth had not stopped talking the entire time. Threats, then orders, then demands, then something approaching pleading. His crew had stopped listening around minute 8. Oles stood on the bridge of the flagship and watched his sensors with the quiet attention of a man who had processed the situation and moved past the part where he was surprised by it. He opened a channel to the Sovereign. Captain Akafer, this is Sub-Commander Oles. I am surrendering the Drathan fleet, all vessels, full military surrender. A pause. Consul Voreth does not agree. He is currently being restrained by members of his own security detail. A brief pause from the Sovereign. Acknowledged, hold position. We'll send a boarding party within the hour. Understood, Oles said. He looked at Voreth, who had gone quiet because 3 of his own guards were holding his arms and one had, very politely, asked him to stop talking. We should not have done this, Oles said. Voreth said nothing. Outside, on galactic feeds that had been recording since Voreth's first broadcast, every civilization with a receiver was watching the same thing. 112 Earth ships, undetected until the moment they chose to act, taking apart the Drathan fleet with the calm efficiency of people who had spent 72 hours doing nothing but prepare. Ambassador Dean watched from the Accord vessel. His aide Paz stood beside him in silence. They were ready the whole time, Paz said finally. Yes, Dean said. How long do you think they had been prepared for something like this? Dean considered it. I suspect, he said, since approximately the second day they left their own solar system for the first time. He was quiet for a moment. Make a note, he said to Paz. When this is over, I want to send Director Romero a message, and I want to choose every word myself. First ships to arrive at Calder's Rest were not warships. They were 3 large white vessels with green markings, the kind that meant medical and relief, and they dropped out of FTL in the planet's orbit 6 hours after the last Drathan ship surrendered. Behind them came supply freighters, engineering vessels, and colony support ships carrying temporary housing, water purification equipment, food stocks, and the heavy machinery needed to start pulling a bombed world back together. Director Romero was on the lead medical ship. There had been no announcement, no press statement about her travel plans. She had simply gotten on the ship when it was ready to leave, because there was nowhere else she felt she should be. The shelters opened and people came out into smoke and ash and the ruin of what their towns had been. Romero was there when they came out. She did not give a speech. She walked from shelter to shelter and helped people carry their children and their bags back into a daylight that smelled wrong and showed them, clearly and without mercy, what had been done to their world. She stayed for 4 days. On the second day, a 14-year-old girl from a town called Milford found Romero at the edge of what had been the town center and asked, very directly, why this had happened. Romero thought about giving a political answer. In the end, she gave the honest one. Because someone decided that who we are was something he could use, she said. And when we told him no, he decided to punish us for it. The girl looked at the ruins. Are we going to rebuild? Yes, Romero said. Will it happen again? It's less likely than it was 3 days ago, Romero said. It was the most honest answer she had. The trial of Grand Consul Vorath began 6 weeks later at the Galactic Tribunal on neutral Meteori Point. 7 judges from 7 civilizations. Earth's legal team on one side, Vorath's defense on the other. The prosecution case was presented by a human lawyer named Del Faro. He was not dramatic about it. He had sensor logs, broadcast recordings, the full surrender record from Oles, the intelligence summary Vorath's own office had used to decide Earth would comply, and a point-by-point breakdown of every charter violation. He was very, very thorough. Oles testified on the 3rd day. He answered every question clearly and without evasion. He described the orders he had received and the orders he had carried out. When asked if countermanding Vorath had been a difficult decision, he said no, because what Vorath had ordered was obviously wrong and had been wrong from the beginning. Vorath was stripped of his title on the 31st day and sentenced to permanent exile. The Drathan Empire reorganized under a provisional council. 3 of the 7 council members sent formal apologies to Earth. Romero replied to each one personally and moved on. What happened next surprised most of the galaxy. Every major military power sent observers to debrief Earth's campaign. They wanted to know how Earth had assembled a secret fleet, where the ships had been built, how the crews had trained without anyone noticing. Earth's military office answered every question, politely and in full. The answers were, in many ways, more unsettling than the battle. The Second Fleet had been built over 22 years, not exactly in secret but quietly, under infrastructure contracts and maintenance budgets with names that did not draw attention. The crews had trained during deep space rotations listed in public records as survey missions. The intelligence operation was not a special program. It was standard practice. Earth had monitored every military power bordering its space since the first year of interstellar travel, as a matter of basic policy. A general from the Karath Federation, reviewing the debrief files, wrote in his private log, "They were not hiding this because they were planning something. They were hiding it because they did not want anyone to feel threatened. I am not sure we understood that distinction before now. Admiral Drav, back in retirement for the second time, sat on the porch of his house on a coast that had mild winters and said almost nothing to the journalists who came looking for quotes. He answered one question from a young reporter who approached him with visible nervousness. "Are you proud of what happened?" the reporter asked. Drav thought about it. "I'm relieved we were ready," he said. "Pride feels wrong for something that should never have had to happen." "What about people who say Earth is now a military power other civilizations should worry about?" Drav looked out at the water. "A species that fights back when its people are killed is not a threat," he said. "It's just a species. The ones who should worry are the ones who didn't understand that already." He shook his head. "We never wanted to be feared. We wanted to be left alone. Those are very different things, and it concerns me that so many people in this galaxy needed a demonstration to learn it." He did not say anything else. The reporter thanked him and left. Drav sat on his porch and watched the water for the rest of the afternoon. On Calder's Rest, the first new grain shoots were coming up through the ash. They were small and pale and very green against all that dark burned earth, and the people of Milford and Junction and Southreach came out every morning to check on them, the way farmers always check on things planted in difficult ground, with patience and the quiet certainty that growing things come back. 12 months after the battle, something unusual happened at the Galactic Mediation Council. The council had existed for 60 years, with 12 permanent seats and observer positions for 30 more. Earth had occupied an observer seat for most of that time, sending a representative who took careful notes and said very little. That had been, for a very long time, exactly how Earth preferred it. On the first session after the battle, Ambassador Dean of the Velhari Accord stood and made a formal motion. He proposed that Earth be offered a permanent seat. Not because of military power, not as a reward for defeating the Drathans. In a long and careful speech he had spent weeks writing, he argued that Earth had spent a century watching the galaxy make decisions, had understood those decisions better than most of the people making them, and had demonstrated under the worst possible pressure that they held to their own principles, even when breaking them would have been easier. "We do not need Earth on this council because they have a large fleet," Dean said. "We need Earth because they have spent 100 years paying attention while the rest of us were busy." The motion passed 11-1. Earth's first act as a permanent member was to propose a rebuilding framework for Calder's Rest with contributions from every council member who had watched the bombardment on their screens. The argument was simple. You watched it happen. You share some responsibility to the people it happened to. The motion passed, and the contributions came in, not large from every member but consistent, and the rebuilding on Calder's Rest moved faster than it would have otherwise. The second act was a review of the Neutrality Charter with real enforcement language. It took 8 months of negotiation and passed with teeth in it, and several smaller civilizations sent quiet notes of thanks because the new language protected them too. Commander Sierra Nyland took command of the EFS Ardent 7 months after the battle, a fast ship that spent most of its time at the edges of known space. At her commissioning ceremony, Wren told her something he had been thinking about since the day after the fight. "You know what actually won that engagement," he said. "Not the ships, not the formation. The 19 hours you spent at your station before a single shot was fired." Sierra considered that. Someone had to do it. "Yes," Wren said, "and you did. That is the job, not the moment, the 19 hours before the moment." She took the Arden out 2 days later and did not look back. Oles was released from tribunal supervision after his testimony was fully processed. He was offered transport back to Drathan space and declined it without explaining why, and instead requested a temporary residence permit on a human colony called Vander's Shore, a mid-sized trading world with good weather and busy ports. He spent his days walking through markets and residential areas and industrial streets and parks. He watched humans in their ordinary lives, loud and quiet, busy and idle, arguing and laughing, the full range of it. He ate at small restaurants. He read on public benches. He occasionally had long conversations about nothing in particular with people who found him interesting and did not seem alarmed by what he was. He was trying to understand something that had been bothering him since the moment he stood on the bridge of the Drathan Certainty and watched his ships fire on an empty farming world. He found part of the answer standing in front of a history museum in the port city, reading a quote carved into the stone above the entrance. The words were old, from before human spaceflight, from a period humans called, with characteristic bluntness, the bad years. The quote said, "We are not a warlike people, but we do not surrender." He stood in front of it for a long time. Then he went inside and spent 3 hours reading about human history. And when he came out, he sat on a bench across the street and thought about what it meant that a species capable of what he had read in that museum was also capable of 72 hours of patient, legal, carefully documented restraint before responding to an act of war. He thought about Vorath, who had looked at that restraint and seen weakness. He thought about the burning fields of Calder's Rest, which had been empty when the fire came. He thought about Director Romero, standing in ash and listening to a teenager ask why. After a while, he stopped thinking and just watched the street. The ordinary movement of ordinary people on a world that was, by every measure, unremarkable. That was the part he kept coming back to. Far from Vander's shore, the EFS Sovereign ran slow patrol near the outer boundary of the human system. Wren was on the bridge when the sensor board registered a new contact. Unknown signature. Unknown origin. Approaching slowly, broadcasting on a frequency not in any standard database. He studied it for 20 minutes before opening the channel. "This is Captain Wren Ockhaffer of the Earth Federation ship Sovereign. We are reading your approach. Please identify yourself and state your purpose. You are welcome to enter this system. We ask only that you come in peace." Static, then something that was not quite language, frequencies shifting and patterns repeating, a signal trying to find a shape both sides could use. Wren waited. He was patient. The signal shifted and something in the pattern resolved into rough meaning, assembled from mathematics rather than words, carrying something that translated loosely as, "We have been watching for a long time and we were not certain. We are certain now." Wren looked at it for a moment. Then he opened the channel again. "Take your time," he said. "We'll be here."